And 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. I am your host, Brian Martinez, and I'm here with Karen and our very special guest. She is a, let's see, I got my notes. She's a YouTuber, social, political, and cultural commentator, and the best part, she is living proof of the Straughan effect. Welcome to Honey Badger Radio, roaming Millennial. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. So, I have always enjoyed your videos for a while. In particular, ever since the let's call it the Lacey Green incident with your channel, that was what got my attention. I think that might have been a reason for your channel exploding as well. But I wanted to ask you a couple of questions regarding what you do and, you know, how far you've come and everything, but also some stuff related to a very recent interview you had with Cassie J, which is the thing that prompted me to see if you would like to come on our show.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so number one, you've been a YouTuber for about a year now. Why did you decide to start making content?
Well, it's actually, I've been a YouTuber for about 2 years. It's going to be 2 years in May, but before that, I wasn't a full-time YouTuber. I was just kind of uploading videos sporadically just as a hobby, but I kind of got interested in YouTube, I think the same reason anyone does. I enjoy talking about these issues, social political commentary. I kind of felt that at the time, there wasn't anyone saying the kinds of things that I believed or addressing things the way that I wanted to address them. So I thought, why not? And with YouTube, I mean, we as YouTubers, we all have our issues with them. But as a platform, I still think it's a great community and it's a great tool for people to have if they want to get involved in a conversation like the one around politics or social issues.
Wow, that was a really concise. Looks like you get asked that question a lot.
Once or twice.
Yeah. So I'm gonna try and throw you a couple of curveballs. So I know you talk about lots of different things. What we talk about on this channel, Honey Badger Radio, has a specific focus on men's issues, and as a necessary discussion surrounding that, we talk about feminism. Because we have to, because you can't talk about men's issues without talking about feminism. What are your thoughts on? I know you've made videos about it, but what are your thoughts about feminism here or here, anywhere else in the world, in the present, the past, in general?
Well, I mean, when someone asks, so what do you think about feminism? You really could go all sorts of directions with that, right? I mean, if we're going by the typical textbook definition dictionary, do I believe that men and women should have equal rights and equal opportunities? Yes, of course. But I'm sure you guys know when we look at the current feminist movement right now, because feminist, it's not just a descriptive term, it's actually a political movement as well that has changed and evolved. I don't think that they're looking for equal rights or equal opportunities. I think there's a lot of feminists out there who, maybe are that's just what they want and that's just the word they use. But if we look at the hardcore activists, the people who actually make this sort of, outreach their lives, I think they're looking at things from a very gynocentric perspective where they actually do want not just equality, but actual special privileges and stuff. And then if we look into things like intersectional feminism, then it's not just men versus women instead of men and women together. Then it's like non-white women versus white men. And it's become a really divisive factor in our society, which is too bad, because I think there have been issues with the feminist movement really from its inception. It's never been strictly about equality, but I think the longer that it's gone on, the more we've kind of seen the privilege that they're seeking manifest. And I think it's now it's essentially just, I'm a woman, give me things, throw birth control at me and I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's like inequality. Whenever they complain about access, we demand access to birth control. It really just boils down to we want free shit.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we want someone else to pay for our birth control and things like that. But or we want free abortions. We don't want to have to. And they need to take as little time as possible. It's like it should be quicker, in and out, quicker than a haircut at Supercuts.
Exactly.
So essentially. I wanted to throw you a curveball. Sorry to interrupt, Brian.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you exactly when did you realize that you identified with the Nazi ideology?
I think it was sometime after I posted my first video and was told that I was a Nazi, I kind of had to step back and reevaluate. Maybe, like, what? I mean, people keep calling me this. Maybe it is in fact true. Yeah, but I think that's one of the terms where feminists as a whole, and I'm not sure if it's because it is such a female-centric movement, and I mean, I don't mean to sound stereotypical, but I know females tend to be a little bit more over-emotional when we're talking about things, but yeah, I feel like there's this tendency to just throw names at each other. I got called a Nazi after the squeaky toy is not okay. I got called a Nazi after I made a video about the gender binary, and it's like, okay, well, I mean, I didn't really bring up any Nazi talking points at all, so I'm kind of confused how that even came up. But yeah, apparently that's what I am according to people on the internet. So what can I do?
Well, you gotta shoot higher. You gotta get on that SPLC hate list because we are there. We made it, especially Karen.
Yeah, I saw that. And that's so. I mean, and at first
so
when I heard about the SPLC, I thought it was just kind of like this joke that no one took seriously, like Straughan or Jezebel or something. But people actually donate to them, which is shocking to me.
Oh, they're worth like something like $300 million or something like that.
I don't get it. I don't understand.
And it's like all they do is take donations. I don't even know if they really do any kind of like they started off by doing lawsuits against the KKK to essentially make the KKK go broke, right? And so I mean, like, noble beginnings, I guess, but they all they do now is just collect money, pay their executive staff and their board of directors, and then collect more money.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
they're a nonprofit worth $300 million.
Man, and the only thing I've ever seen them do is just name groups that kind of go against the modern day progressive agenda and call them hate groups. Like, is that activism now? I doesn't seem like it to me, but apparently.
Agreed.
Quick question, roaming about this is about feminism in a way. I want this something I was wondering about. Do you believe that women were ever oppressed in history as a group?
Well, I think every group has been oppressed historically. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's one group where we can say you've always had it amazing. And I think if we look at things like I think suffrage is important, and women were denied suffrage. So, but then again, so were men until actually very, very recently when looking at when women were getting it. So I think a lot of the times when we talk about women's oppression, it's through the lens of that everyone else had it fine. And I think when we're looking at the past, we need to be a little bit more, a little bit more honest and say everyone was oppressed and every group has had to kind of fight for its rights, whether that's men or women. And it's been it's been different journeys for each of them, but I think that women and men have each had their different struggles. And I think when we talk about women's oppression now, especially, it's kind of obfuscated by a lot of the things that we take for granted in the West, right? Because the average feminist will say that oppression is ongoing. And I think that's very, very debatable, especially when we look at things from a global perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I would make the argument that when it comes to the ideology of feminism, the goal is not to actually address women's issues. The goal is to continuously perpetuate more feminism. So that way there's always something new that we need to take care of with women. So we can keep sending us money, keep giving us gibs, it just goes on and on and on. So you watched The Red Pill. Did you learn anything from that film that you didn't know about before? Did it change your perspective?
I thought the interviews were very, very illuminating because I forget her name because I've also been watching the outtakes that weren't included that she's been releasing, and Big Red.
Shanty Binks. Her name is Shanty Binks.
Shanty Binks.
Yeah. Shanty Binks.
So I before looking at Cassie's footage had never seen her in a non-yelling at the street corner fashion. So it was interesting to me to see how she kind of rationalizes her own behavior. And I think it's not just that. These people, I think, obviously do have very different values than someone like me who's an egalitarian must have. But I think it helped me realize the kind of how different their worldview is right now, how different they perceive the world to be currently in terms of how women and men are treated, because if you listen to a lot of these people, you'd think that I don't know, women who attempt to leave the home are being rounded up on the street by religious police and being brought back to be impregnated by force, which is absolutely not true. So I think in feminism, there's not only the issue of, I guess, a values difference, but there's also, I think, a reality perception difference.
Mm-hmm. Karen,
yeah,
you want to say something?
I would definitely agree with that. That the particular way that they see the world, and I think this actually comes down to sort of the sex differences, right? The differences in our psychology, some of which James Damore talked about, but that one of the most prominent being women being higher in trait neuroticism, which is just essentially being prone to negative emotion, right? And women are generally more sensitive to things like discomfort. They have a lower threshold of what they would consider to be an offense worthy of an apology, whether they're on the giving end of that offense or the receiving end of it. So they apologize more because they have that lower threshold, not because men don't feel apologizing is worthwhile, but because they have a higher threshold of what they would consider worthy of an apology. And so you look at all of these things, and then, I mean, Jordan Peterson had said something about, he thought that female psychology didn't evolve as female psychology. It didn't evolve to serve women so much as to serve the mother-child dyad, right? And when you have a much more vulnerable offspring that's always in your vicinity, in your immediate vicinity, you're going to be more sensitive to cold, you're going to be more alert to danger, you're going to be more likely to complain and say, you know, like, or, I mean, that's the early alert system, especially with the cold thing, right? Because women complain about the air conditioning all the time, right?
Yes, absolutely.
It's sexist, Karen, don't you know?
But it's because we evolved to feel the cold more. Not necessarily to be more vulnerable to it or whatever, but to feel it so that we know to go cover up the baby, right? If I'm feeling uncomfortable, then the baby is obviously going to and they're more likely to actually suffer from some kind of physical problem because of the cold, right? So when you look at how they view the world, and I would suggest that a lot of feminists are sort of on this sort of extreme end of female personality types, right? On some assorted traits, right? They're on the extreme end. Of course, they're going to see unpleasantness and discomfort and oppression and suffering and all of this all over the place and feel put upon and be, have all of those negative emotions. And I think that they rationalize those emotions away, not by saying, well, I'm more sensitive than men are. Men seem to not have a problem. They walk down the street. They're not afraid at night. And I'm afraid to walk down the street at night. And they translate that into, that must mean I'm in more danger, rather than that just means that my baseline fear level is higher.
That's actually a great point. And actually one of the things that I learned not that long ago, it was that I've as a small person and as a female, I have had instances, especially anytime I've been downtown, where I didn't feel safe walking by myself because of my gender, because of my size. And for the longest time, I actually did think that was an example of male privilege, not having to be afraid walking down the street, because obviously you'd think, oh, you're a man, you're bigger. That was until I learned that statistically, for essentially every violent assault, men are more likely to be the victims than a woman. And so that was even something where I was like, whoa, but just because, it's my perception, I guess, being a female, maybe I'm more aware to situations that might potentially dangerous, where I thought I was in more danger, even though it turns out when you actually look at the numbers, that's just not true.
True. And it's also, I think that because society seems to care about women's safety, of course, they're always talking about women's safety and women's lack of safety and making women more safe. And of course, as a woman, you absorb those messages and you think, oh, what? I'm not safe. I must not be safe if that's it, all everyone wants to talk about. And with men, nobody's really giving them the talk. Nobody's really concerned for their safety. So they'd internalize that and think, well, if nobody's concerned about it, then
must be
it's
fine, I guess.
Probably fine, right? Yeah. So I think a lot of these things are sort of self-perpetuating in terms of the narratives themselves, self-fulfilling in terms of how people perceive their situation, right? Like the way you were feeling, and you are more vulnerable if somebody chooses to attack you.
Yeah, if the attack actually happens.
But you're less likely to be attacked, and that's interesting too, I would think, because being that you are more vulnerable, being that you would be an easier target, the fact that people would choose the harder target seems to imply that even violent criminals would there's a taboo against hitting
a girl, right? Or
yeah.
Even criminals are gynocentric. Or this could be a case of when we look at the statistic that men are more often the victims of violent crime. Maybe it's because there's it's not like some stranger out of nowhere that attacks them, but rather something that that they're like somebody they know, like an acquaintance, and maybe they've had tensions building for a while, and it sort of turns into a violent crime. Does that make sense?
I think too. When you look at that sort of that game that some women play at the bar or whatever, let's you and him fight, right? So the woman will actually go and pick a fight with a guy, and the guy will go up to her guy and say, control your woman. And and she's actually trying to get her man to get into a fight with this guy, and the fact that she's the one who's making the provocation, but the man, instead of dealing with her, even yelling at her, bitching her out, whatever, is going to go straight to whatever man she might be with, and take it up with him. I mean, there seems to be a lot of these sort of ways that men and women interact that I find really just kind of puts the lie to so much of what feminists seem to believe. That I would rather, instead of punching this woman who's all up in my face, I would rather go to her taller, stronger boyfriend and pick a fight with him. I mean, that's
right. And even in regards to, I guess, hitting other people, I abhor violence. I don't think in our direct relationships, unless it's self-defense, I don't think it's ever okay. But I remember that it was something in regards to domestic violence. I actually tweeted out that if I'm a man, or if someone is a man and a woman hits him, I do think he has the right to defend himself, because in my opinion, if someone has chosen to attack you, they're the one who's sort of broken that social norm, and right at that moment, your greatest concern, regardless of your gender, should be to protect yourself, right, and restraining them, whatever it is. And I was surprised at how many people actually out there were saying, like, no, you can't. Even if she hits you, like, you can't do that. I'm like, well, I mean, if she I would hate to see someone smack my brother or my father or something, and he not being able to do anything. But yeah, so our society has a lot of these things that I think really illustrate how we're still not looking at things through an egalitarian lens. And I think, there are evolutionary reasons behind it. But I think when it comes to the point where we're actually saying to individuals in our society, I'm sorry, you can't defend yourself, then I think we have a problem.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm just butting in. If there's like a silence, I want to throw something at the chat.
Yeah, no, I was going to say next question, Brian.
Oh yeah, it's okay. First off, I want to say this to the chat. So guys, please hit that like button. It helps us out a lot with our statistics and that kind of thing, our analytics. But also, if you have any questions for Roaming Millennial, just send us a super chat and I'll read it out to her. We're only going to be going until maybe 15 to the hour at the latest, because she has to be at another place. So, and again, I really appreciate that she took the time to come on. So yeah, if you have any questions, send them through. I did see someone ask to see the dog. So maybe you can put
I don't know where she scampered off to.
Oh, okay,
Hopefully somewhere a little bit more quiet.
Did you say she was 4 months old?
Yes, she is large.
Oh yeah.
She's about 70 pounds.
I thought it was like I thought it was a Newfie or something. 70?
Yeah.
Holy crap. My dog is 1 year old. He's about almost getting close to 60 pounds.
Yeah, my dog's
yeah.
a year old, a little over a year old, and she's about 45 pounds.
Yeah. We're all dog people in the stream right now. Yay. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so before you saw the red pill, did you think about men's issues, and were there any that you thought should be taken seriously? If so?
Yeah, well, I actually saw the red pill not too long ago, considering when it was released. I actually only saw it earlier this year, around January. I saw it on Amazon Prime. And before that, I had heard about Cassie J a lot and about all of the hubbub this movie had caused. But before I saw that movie, I was still very interested in men's rights concerning custody in divorce cases, because I think, in my opinion, that actually is a statistically verifiable example of systemic and institutional, I guess, sexism, because I've done videos before about fatherless homes and the effect that actually having a father who is a strong role model can have on a child's life of either gender, really, and just the kind of consequences that occur when that strong male figure is removed from the equation. So when I was looking into that, I saw, I guess, how rare completely equal custody is in the U.S. And I mean, I'm a Dr. Phil fan. I am a bit embarrassed to admit, but you see so many fathers out there who want more time with their children, who want to be involved in their lives, but because of the court system, a lot of the times they have the mother, if he's done something to upset her, who kind of stands as a barrier between a father and his child. Where I don't think that your parenthood should come under question simply because you are divorcing the mother of your child, right? I mean, all of a sudden you're deemed less fit, or you have less access to your child just because of a contract that you have going on with another adult. That doesn't make sense to me. So I think that's the men's issue that I became most interested in, and I'm probably still most passionate about, because when it comes to kids, it's not right to take away their parents like that.
I would agree too, and I think that it's sort of indicative of where we are now, that the culture is sort of willing to prioritize the needs or desires or just wishes of adult women over what's best for their children, the needs and well-being of kids. So it's extremely frustrating for people like me too, because I mean there's so much bad data out there in terms of there was one report by, I think it was the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Committee or something like that, that they made the point that when men seek custody, they get it, right? And so the reason why these men don't have custody is because none of them bother trying, right? They just agree with the mother that, okay, you have full sole custody, right? But the data that they used, when I actually went in and looked, and somebody who has a blog called Breaking the Science, he looked at all of the data. It took him forever to even get a copy of this report, 2 years or something like that. And then, of course, they cited some research that he couldn't get a hold of. So he called the actual researcher who had done this research, and she was like, they can't use the data that I collected to determine that. They can't, it's not suited for that purpose, right? So, I mean, and I still see people citing this report. It was from 1989 or something like that, as evidence that there's no bias in family court, no bias against fathers. And even if the data that they used was suitable for the purpose, even if you said, okay, well, this data is perfect, right, and it'll work, even when you crunch their own numbers, you still find that women who seek custody are 65% more likely to get some form of physical custody than men who do, right? So, and men are something like 6 times more likely, who seek custody, more likely to not get any custody at all than women are who seek custody, right? So,
and I've brought this up in my videos, and I've always, every time I've mentioned it, had at least one feminist come and say, well, up until I'm not sure if it was the 70s or something, it was totally the other way.
No.
Women weren't getting their children. And okay, even if that is true, does that make the inequality now okay? Right. Yeah. And I feel like that is very representative of the feminist movement, because it's like, that's the thing about social justice, is the justice is kind of it's vengeful, right? Because that's what the justice system is. You have to penalize something for someone for something they've done wrong in the past, and it's I think the mentality that, oh well, because we've had it bad before, now we should have extra good, and at the expense of someone else's rights or parental rights, that, I mean, I can't get behind that, and I don't know how you can call yourself a promoter of equal rights of any type if you're saying that.
Well, true, and you know, the 70s was before most people were born, right? Like, you know, like most of these people, most of these feminists, you know, the popular ones anyway. I mean, they weren't. I was born in 1970, right? And so I would not have lived through a custody battle, you know, prior to the 1970s, where I lost custody of my children to my ex-husband because of bias that went in the other direction, right? So, I mean, like, they're taking revenge based on things that never happened to them, right? And based on things that men did back then that have nothing to do with what men are doing now. And so it's kind of like an original sin kind of thing. You know, all these men who were born, you know, in 1980 or later are still somehow responsible for the actions of men who died before they were born. It's just
almost like it's a religion.
Almost.
I saw someone in the chat ask about circumcision.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. So I've been getting this ever since I said that we were going to have you on, because there was a stream that you did like a few years ago with Hunter Avalone where you talked about male circumcision came up as a topic, and you said essentially that it wasn't in your mind at the time a very important issue. And so this was a few years ago. So people want to know what your thoughts are on circumcision now.
Well, I think when I say it's not an important issue, that's not to say that it doesn't matter, but it's definitely not an issue that I consider myself an activist on behalf of, if that makes sense, right? And like currently, I think I've spoken to people about circumcision, and circumcising babies is not something that I'm supportive of. But at the same time, I would just like to mention that the WHO currently has initiatives for circumcising adults voluntarily in Africa as a way to reduce, I guess, the transmission of STIs. So I think, you know, when we're talking about a baby, like it's a question of bodily autonomy. And I think one thing that I've heard anti-circumcision advocates talk about is comparing it to female genital mutilation. There's a lot of different levels of female genital mutilation, one of which they actually completely cut off the genitalia entirely and sew it back up. So I think there's, you know, an issue of the accuracy of reflection, and it's not this. We have different organs, right? So there's not going to be a perfect, I guess, comparison. But yeah, I mean, it still is violating the bodily autonomy of a child, which I don't think is all right. And
yeah,
I wouldn't support it for my own child, definitely. And I'm also coming from a background. I mean, circumcision is really only prevalent, widespread for every person in the U.S. and Canada to a lesser degree. So I don't know if this is going to be an overshare in their opinion, but like no boys in my family are circumcised. That's just not something that like in Asia that's common, or even among French Canadians.
Actually,
so,
in my culture, Puerto Ricans, we don't usually circumcise either. So I'm good.
Yeah, no, and my ex was you know, English, well, Scottish heritage, lived in England, moved to Canada when he was 5 with his parents, and when people were asking me when I was pregnant with our first kid, you know, are you going to circumcise him? And I'd never even thought about it, right?
Yeah.
So I asked him, and he just said, no kid of mine is going to get part of his dick cut off. So that's the end of the conversation right there. And I was like, sounds good to me. Because, like, why would, you know, like, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, like, this is a man who's lived, at that point, he was like 40 or something like that. He's lived till age 40 with a foreskin and had no problems. So honestly, so I mean, but I think that there's there is a general trend. It's getting to be less and less and less in the U.S., less and less and less over time in Canada. And I think for me, because I really feel strongly about it, I would like to hasten that, right? And I understand that there are some people who disagree with it, but they're happy to just let the trend continue. Right? It's kind of like atheism, you know, if you're an atheist or an anti-theist or whatever, and, you know, some of them are like, I need to destroy religion, I need to bring an end to it, I need to take an active role in putting an end to it, and sort of converting people away from their religion. Others are just kind of like, no, I'm looking at the trends, I'm liking what I'm seeing, I really don't want to rip out somebody's personal God and leave a God-shaped hole in their heart and, you know, and make them miserable. That's not what I'm about. So I think that, honestly, I think it's sort of like, are people going to just let things take their natural course, which I think that they will, it'll take a while, or are they going to push to hasten that change? And I think, you know, honestly, Iceland is a very, very brave country. They have suggested a bill that would outlaw genital cutting for both boys and girls. And the religious community, the Muslim and Jewish communities, are all in a tizzy over that and freaking out. So I mean,
on that.
And we know what happens when you suggest that the religious communities, then they kind of take their political privilege as a lobby and start yelling and screaming. So yeah.
And regarding that, I think there's, with the religious community, the bill in Iceland, I think, allows, it's not that they're saying this can never happen, it's just that you have to be above a certain age, right? Which I think that's something that I support, like, because like I was saying, the WHO is doing these things to adults. So I think that if you're a man and you choose to do that, and there's also some conditions where I think that if the foreskin is too small, it can cause discomfort. Right. You know, that's one thing, and you should be able to make that decision. Just like I know someone brought up in the chat labiaplasties, which are becoming increasingly common among porn stars, I think. But yeah, I think you should be, if you're an adult, allowed to do that. I think the religious community, for the sake of bodily autonomy, should be able to say, oh, okay, you know what, we're going to wait until you're old enough to make this decision.
Yeah, I think so too.
Can I ask a question here? So I don't think that Karen and I or anybody on Honey Badger Radio would have a problem with people that want to voluntarily, as adults, voluntarily go get circumcised. But does it actually prevent STIs?
It does not prevent STIs,
or
but they've done double-blind studies where they look at comparative rates. So it's one of the things that they're trying in Africa. And I'm not saying that this is like, oh, you don't need to have a condom if you're doing that. Like, that's absolutely not true. But it's one of the things that they're trying as a global health initiative. And I think it's because of the rates are being so high there, they're just trying everything that they can. At this point, I don't think that if you're a man in a developed first world nation, I don't know if that term is still PC, that it's something you need to worry about. But it's just that I actually have encountered anti-circumcision activists that do not want it permissible under any circumstances. They feel very strongly about that. So that was one of the things that I kind of like, okay, hey, well, this is, these are people choosing to do it. Would you still have a problem with that? So that was, I guess, why I brought that up.
No, I agree. I do think like the African studies, there were 3 of them. There are like some serious issues with them, including what they did was they took the 2 groups, they circumcised one group right away. They gave them both sort of condoms and safety information and all of that, some sex ed, right? Circumcised the one group, then let them all go. And then 6 months later, I guess, followed up, right, and tested them to see if they'd acquired HIV. And so they found that fewer men in the circumcised group had acquired HIV, but they'd started timing it right from the point where the circumcised group was circumcised, which they needed anywhere from 3 weeks to 2 months to heal. Before they could even have sex, right? And then they came back several times. That group came back several times to check on their incisions, and were given more condoms and more sexual safety counseling, right? So essentially what you have is like a lead time bias. The studies, all three of them were stopped early. Like they had a projected end date where they were gonna take measurements for however many months after the start. They ended them all early and said that, you know, our results are so wow, right? We're going to offer circumcision to even these men who were in the control group. And in reality, the improvement, right? So you're looking at, you have a 1.8% chance or something like that per unprotected sexual encounter of acquiring HIV, and it cut that by 60%. So you're looking at, you know, 1.8% down to 0.8% or something like that. So I mean, these are very, very small numbers, right, to begin with. And then what they've found now is that in some of these areas where they've had this program going, they're actually seeing rates increase. God, what was it? Was it Tanzania? But they have seen rates of acquisition of HIV increase since they implemented this program, and they suggest that it is something called compensatory behavior. That these men, they've been told that they're circumcised, they're less at risk, they're not going to catch anything, and so they don't use condoms. So.
Yeah, and I think with that, it is an area where it's like it's hard to study because I mean in the West we have the resources where we can easily practice safe sex. So it's really like, I mean, places like Africa where, and then even then like kind of making these studies is a little bit problematic. I would love to see them do more research onto this because I think AIDS in that area or HIV in that area is such a huge problem. But I mean, yeah, like I was saying, in the West, it's, you know, just be safe. It's not something that is safe unless you have like a specific condition that you need to do. And to see, I know there are some men out there who very much regret the fact that their parents chose to circumcise them. You know, they have sexual dysfunction issues, the like, decrease of sensitivity and stuff like that. If there's too much cut, it can, I guess, feel like uncomfortable all the time. And for me, that's just, it's hard to justify that just based on like, oh, some religious groups want to be able to do it, or oh, it's what we've done for the longest time, so we might as well
it's
continue
tradition.
doing it. Yeah, to me, it's tradition is not a good enough reason to continue anything really. Like that's not an in and of itself justification.
Yeah, agreed. Perfect.
All right,
we're all in agreement.
Well,
we haven't got anything accomplished today, but at least we have consensus.
I have some super chats that the people want to ask. And I know that's getting like a little bit close for you to go, so
we can do the super chats first.
Okay, I'm gonna do the super chats. Okay, Zeranx gives us $2 and says, "Why do initial waves of feminism?" He just wrote "fem," but why do initial waves of feminism get a pass from you? Well, maybe they don't. So like he's talking about first wave, second wave.
Like
it doesn't sound like
she gave them a pass. So
well, yeah, I think there's, if we just look at, do I think women should have suffrage? Like, yes, but I think when you look at the original suffragettes movement, there was actually, there was a lot more things that they didn't want poorer women. You know, there are groups who thought that it should only be like the landed aristocracy of women should have the equal votes. There was also, feminists during that time who didn't want increased participation in things like the military and the draft, which was a huge part of, I guess, citizenship, like civic engagement for men to justify the votes and stuff like that. And if you look at the earliest feminists, I don't think that they were egalitarians. I think that they wanted votes for themselves. And
none of the responsibility that comes with it. Because,
right. So I can still agree with like, yeah, women should have votes, but I don't think that they were perfect by any means, especially when we're looking through an egalitarian lens of today. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Insert jank, make me a sandwich, give me a thank you for feminism here. All right. So Lady Justice gives us 50 kronas. That's what the DKKs are, I believe. And says, to Roaming Millennial, what was your first red pill moment and what got you started on speaking out against feminism? Those
Ooh,
things
that's
might
hard.
not be related, but
First red pill moment. I don't know. I didn't grow like I grew up in Asia, so I think a lot of the instances about like feminism, so that I didn't get exposed to until I was in college, when I came to the States to studies in at USC. So I think that was sort of the first time I was exposed to a lot of these ideas, and the first time I had an experience with, I guess, intersectional feminist was my roommate was having a gender studies class as part of her diversity requirement, and she was talking about men getting pregnant, and how it needs to we need to examine the way we approach gender because of that, and how gender isn't a binary because of that. And I mean, that's not really anything to do with equal rights, but I think that was the first time when I kind of stood back and thought, okay, maybe feminism doesn't mean what I thought it did if this is what they're talking about. And
Yes.
not that I have an issue with trans people, but the fact that a trans man getting pregnant now means that there is no such thing as a gender binary. Gender is everything and nothing. I think that's just like, that you've taken several leaps there that I don't quite understand.
yeah. God, I wanted to. Well, Karen, if you wanted to say anything.
No,
to that.
no. I think that
Oh,
would be
okay.
that would be kind of the moment that you're like,
Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
you
and this
said
is being taught in a school, so I was like,
Yeah.
is this? I guess this is accepted. Like, does everyone think this? Am I just what? Where'd
Yeah.
this come from?
So you said you came from China. So did they not have this kind of feminism in China at the time, or was your?
Oh no.
No.
No. Yeah, and I grew up in I have lived in mainland China, but I grew up mainly in Hong Kong, which a former British colony. It was actually still a British colony the time I was there, and like absolutely not. Yeah, just no. I so many things were foreign. The idea of like pay gaps, even like gender roles were something that I think are much still more strongly enforced back there. There were just so many dynamics that until I came and lived in the West, I was just unfamiliar with. And I guess coming from my more, I guess not like traditional, but that makes it sound like, oh yeah, women get back in the house, and it wasn't even like that, because Hong Kong is a modern metropolis city. Women have careers, but I guess it wasn't until I came to the West and it kind of that juxtaposed with my feminism-less upbringing that I sort of realized how modern day feminism conflicts with my more egalitarian perspective.
Okay, that a good answer. So last super chat is from Inquisitive Child, who gives us $5 and says, thoughts on those who refuse to take preventative measures to reduce personal risk? I shouldn't have to avoid dark alleys. So that's like a quote that they put in there. So I guess yeah, go ahead.
So I mean, we hear this a lot regarding the whole rape culture thing, and I know that there was a inventor or something who came up with some nail polish where if you put it in the drink and there's anything like Rohypnol or something, it reacts and changes the color. So, your drink's been spiked. And I know a lot of feminists were mad about this. Like, well, instead of like doing this, why don't we just teach men not to rape, as if we're not currently teaching everybody not to rape.
Yeah. Because
I
if you
think
tell
that
criminals to stop doing criminal stuff, they'll like
Right,
realize the error
guys,
of their
we should
ways
just
and
outlaw
stop.
crime.
Yeah.
What?
We should like stop people from being bad.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting. I mean, yeah, obviously, in a perfect world, everyone would just be. We wouldn't have to do anything. But do you lock your house door when you're gone? Do you lock your car door when you're gone? I mean, people shouldn't steal. People shouldn't carjack, but you still lock your car door when you're gone. And I think that we all have the responsibility to, I guess, make wise decisions, and that's not to victim blame. That's not to say that it's your fault if you get attacked, but at the same time, we don't want to make it easy, and we don't want to put ourselves in situations where that might be more likely. I don't think that's, in my opinion, I don't think that's victim blaming. I think that's just trying to avoid bad situations, and I do that all the time too. I don't. I mean, I live in a safe area. For me, it's kind of like I don't want to park my car on this street and leave it where it, a lot of people just loitering, and I don't have an alarm system. I just have a lock, right? And it's the same thing when I first lived in LA by myself when I was in university. I never had to lock my doors before that, but all of a sudden I'm locking my doors even when I'm home. And I think that's just being smart.
Yeah, absolutely. I got one more super chat that just came from Inquisitive for $2 that says, awesome, thank you for answering that last question. Roaming, what do you think about, have you thought much about MRAs before the red pill? Like, what do you think about what we do and, you know, like, I guess how it relates to your sort of political views and stuff?
Well, I think when I first heard of MRAs, it was, I think I made a video about like third wave feminism, and I think a lot of people out there confuse MRAs with MGTOW, or like equate the two as being the same. And
oh yeah, absolutely. The mainstream media, I just want to get this in there. The mainstream media always conflates the MRM, the MGTOWs, and the PUAs, and also just like, you know, incels that are really angry and other groups. Basically, everyone that hangs around, I guess, in the manosphere on Reddit and stuff, they just sort of lump it all together and cherry pick the worst examples to make us look as bad as possible, or they just go to David Futrell for all their info. And so, yeah, that's likely what you heard because that's what most people hear. Go on.
Well, I think the thing with like MRAs is that even when it comes to feminism, I don't have an issue with women focusing specifically on issues that affect women in a special way. Like if feminists want to talk about striking a work-life balance as a motherhood, that definitely is something that women have to deal with. Or you know, if you are a woman and you're maybe you want to be in STEM and you're not sure how to navigate that, yeah, maybe some guidance there. And the same goes with men. There are issues that are very, very specific to men, whether it's, you know, the homelessness issue that affects men disproportionately, things like suicide, workplace accidents, even custody battles. I have no problem with us being focused and specific and confronting certain issues of inequality, which there absolutely still exists, right? I mean, we face different challenges as different genders, and I don't have a problem with some men, you know, men and women looking at the men's side of that specifically, and I'm not sure why it seems like that's such an issue for some feminists.
For lots of them. Karen, do you want to add anything to that?
Oh, well, I could tell you why it's an issue, but it would take a lot longer than I think we have left. So I'm gonna just bow out.
We may have to revisit this topic. So and then while we're on the topic, Romy, I want to recommend a book if you hadn't heard of it. So maybe you should write this down because I think this is really interesting stuff. It's by a man named Bob Lewis. I had him on the show, and he wrote a book called The Feminist Lie. And
what?
The book is called The Feminist Lie. It was never about equality, and he goes into the history going all the way back. It's full of really great information. And the thing is, this is just something I just got to put out there, okay? Because I see this a lot. I am entirely, and I know that all the Badgers and many people in the MRM are entirely for, you know, women. Like, we don't want to take anything away from them. We want, you know, we want
I don't know.
them to have
That's not what the feminists have told me. I don't think that's right.
Well, we do want. I mean, like, okay, Brian, you have to be realistic. We don't want to take anything away from them, except for the assumption that they're the better parent that gets them sole custody. I mean, I'm sorry, you can't.
I'm talking about legally speaking. Like, clearly we're egalitarian and stuff. But my biggest thing has always been this. This is just me, my personal battle that I have, and I don't know about the other Badgers and stuff. I am trying to get through people's heads the idea that you don't have to call yourself a feminist to believe in equality or whatever egalitarianism. You don't have to use the label. Even if you think that there are areas in which women need special attention, which I can grant, we can figure out some places where that's true. You don't need the label, and I want people to stop using the label. And but of course, you can't do that without making the case. I'm not saying we should censor them. You know, we got to make the case. But that's why I want people to read this book and have this conversation, because it's not just a set of ideas that a lot of casual people believe. You know, the really nice sounding words. I mean, there is a powerful political movement behind it that likes the fact that people think of it as something you're just supposed to agree with, you know, this idea that we need equality for women. I think that you can have that without calling yourself a feminist.
Right, that'd be like if Christians came up to atheists like, do you believe in treating your neighbor fairly and love and compassion? Then you're a Christian. It's like,
yeah.
No, no.
And we wouldn't stand for it, right? Most people wouldn't say, oh, well, you guys don't get to define what the terms are of this definition. But when it comes to feminism, that way too many people are like, yeah, I mean, I believe in equality. Well, I guess that's what I am now. And that's what they want. They want to be able to say everybody's a feminist. That's why, is it Milo often cites this statistic of, you know, like, oh, only this small percentage, I forget what the number is, but this very small percentage
7% of British women.
Yeah, 7% of British women identify as feminists. And he thinks that that's a win. But what he doesn't understand is if you ask them about feminist ideas without calling them feminist ideas, like you say, do you think that women are underpaid in the workplace? Or do you think that, you know, there is a rape culture? Or do you think that, you know, women need extra help? There'd probably be a much larger percentage of women that would agree, but wouldn't call themselves feminists. And so it's not just it's basically something that where you can't just like go along with the label. You have to like push against it. And I mean, that's what I'm doing anyway. And also getting people to realize that it's not necessary to care about, you know, to care about people and at the same time care about the truth. You know, just like try to understand what the facts are. So those are my thoughts. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel what's so harmful about feminism is like it's a label that everyone is supposed to call themselves, but at the same time, it's also a very specific and very extreme ideology, which I mean, like they're trying to make it seem as if the modern beliefs and I guess dogma of third wave feminism is mainstream, but it's not. And I don't think we should bow down to the fact that they're trying to normalize things like the fact that women today are actively oppressed. Like I don't think we should let that become something that everyone just accepts and takes for granted, because it's absolutely not true.
Okay. Well, we've gone a little bit too long, rooming. I'm really sorry. Is there anything that you wanted to say to us or ask us before I take us out?
Well, I just want to say that I appreciate that you guys have been addressing these issues despite I see how many people react very, very viscerally. And, you know, I get the same thing for, you know, talking about things like migrants. And it's just it's disappointing that you get so much flack. But I think at the same time, it also means what you're doing is that necessary.
We're doing something right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And as someone who I can't wait to be a mom, and I want to grow up in a world where my little boys have as much protection as my little girls. So I guess just, thank you for speaking up about this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Is there a man in your life? Or are you still waiting for Paul Joseph Watson to return those calls?
No, there is, and he's still in school, and so that's why the baby fever has been semi-quelled with a puppy for now.
Oh, is the puppy around? Because people still want to see the puppy. Is she there?
Jelly Bean. Oh, here she is. Actually, she was actually just there.
Is Jelly Bean her name?
It is her name.
The Jelly Bean is actually quite small, and your dog is not small at all.
Yeah, you should call her Pinto Bean. Or,
Lima Bean. Beanstalk.
Okay, well that is a beautiful dog that you got there. So, although my dog is most handsome, I won't even show him because he'll probably blind you guys with his handsomeness. But I'm telling you, sure. I have the most handsome dog ever. Okay, well I guess there was something else I wanted to say, but I can't think of it now. But I want to thank you so much, Roaming, for coming on the show. And I hope that we didn't make you too late. And maybe we can
it's a dentist appointment. They'll deal.
Oh, okay. Maybe we can get you back
Probably
on
running behind
sometime.
Anyway.
Yeah. We can talk about other stuff, hopefully in the future. So, yeah, I guess that's it. Thanks, Roaming, so much for coming on. Thank you guys for watching us on this Fireside Chat. Thanks, Karen, for hanging out and bringing some legitimacy to the stream, because I don't think I could have done that. And, so I guess I'll talk to you guys next